Charges were filed against Al Gerhart earlier this week for blackmail and improper use of a computer. These charges relate to an email he sent to a state senator in which he asked him to pass some legislation or face potentially embarrassing information being released about his family. The state senator at that point turned the information over to the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, who investigated, and earlier this week the district attorney of Oklahoma County filed the charges against Gerhart.
Free speech is what anybody can say, but is there a certain line not to cross?
Well, there are in a sense two lines that we can talk about. One of them is civil and one is criminal. I think it is very easy to understand that this behavior crosses a civil line. And what I mean by a civil line is this. If I as a citizen defame another person or threaten another person, not with violence, but simply in a way maybe that threatens to go after their business or essentially hurt them in some other way, I can be committing a wrong called a tort. In other words, they can sue me in civil court and get a judgment against me. Now, free speech does come into that kind of a scenario, but here's the thing. The U.S. Supreme Court has essentially drawn a line that says if you're a public figure, normally you can't sue for somebody essentially criticizing you, even attacking you in some ways. However, you can if you can show that they are either producing certain false things, they're doing it with actual malice. Essentially, you can get to a line where you can say, no, there is a civil wrong here. And this behavior pretty clearly crosses that line. It gets to a point where there is clear actual malice. It's harder to say whether it crosses the criminal line. And the reason is because, first of all, that line is less well defined. Courts don't always come down the same way as to exactly where you draw it. In Mr. Gerhart's email, there's some language that is traditional language associated with extortion and blackmail, with crime. And probably the most obvious example is the line, "You will regret it." I will make you regret not doing something. That is classic threat language, right? Do this or I will make you regret it. The other language that falls along those lines, when you talk about digging into someone's family, that's typically something designed to produce a fear in somebody, that's over a line. And then when you also go to the point of saying there will be no end to it. Now, maybe that's interpreted simply as saying, I'm going to dig until I find something bad about you to tell people. But it can also be interpreted to say there will be no end to it in terms of no barriers, right? That I will keep going and I will break through barriers of law or barriers of nonviolence or appropriate ethics. There are two ways to interpret it, if not more. And that's why it's much harder as a criminal case to say exactly where this falls, because a lot of it has to do with exactly what you interpret this to mean and what Mr. Gerhart's intentions actually are.